Trump saying he expects to make his announcement for the nomination Monday, July 9th. Trump breaking this news while on a flight to New Jersey just moments ago. Trump saying that he's interviewing 6 or 7 people, including 2 women. He says that it would be appropriate to ask his pick, I should say inappropriate, excuse me, to ask his pick about what they think about Roe v. Wade. Here's what he said about that earlier in the day.
Are you going to ask your nominees beforehand how they might vote on Roe versus Wade?
Well, that's a big one, and probably not. They're all saying, don't do that, you don't do that, you shouldn't do that, but I'm putting conservative people on, but I don't think I'm going to be so specific.
All right, with me now, Howard Dean, former DNC chair and former Vermont governor, Liz Plank, senior producer with Vox Media, and former federal prosecutor Paul Butler. Great to have all 3 of you with us on what is expected to be a very busy news hour. Liz, let me start with you. Your reaction to what we just heard there from the president, effectively saying it would be inappropriate for him to ask any of his potential nominees that he's going to interview what they would do or what they think about the Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that he uses a term, it's specific. Like, we don't have to be specific on that. He, in the past, has not been very specific about his stance on Roe v. Wade or on abortion. During the campaign, we all remember that he said that women should be punished, perhaps, for having abortions. Then he said that they shouldn't, and then he said that they should. And even in his personal life, he's been asked if he's paid for women's abortions in an interview with Maureen Dowd in the New York Times, and he will not confirm nor deny. And so I feel like he's being wishy-washy with this, and the same way that he's been on this issue, generally speaking, as a campaigner and also as a president.
Howard, what do you think of the president's tone today about that particular issue and what he said in that interview and what he was saying to the print pool just on the flight moments ago?
Well, that's the right answer, having appointed judges myself. You don't ask them about questions like that, but of course I don't believe a word Trump says, and nobody else in America does either. So who knows what he's going to do when the guy really gets in there, or the gal gets in there.
Really quickly, if I can, Paul, your reaction as well to this news before we widen the discussion. What do you make of the president saying that he is not going to ask a potential nominee, whether it's appropriate or inappropriate, what they think about Roe v. Wade?
You don't have to ask, Amen, because you kind of already know. And we have evidence of this from Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, who apparently is one of the leading contenders. He's on record as saying that Roe v. Wade is like the infamous Dred Scott case, in which the court said that the black man has no rights, which the white man is bound to respect. But now he's auditioning for a Supreme Court appointment, and so he says, oh, I'd have to respect Roe v. Wade. So what Republican appointees do is lie about what they really think.
So he brings up a really good point, Paul, that like by knowing who the candidates are and who the nominees are on the short list of the president, he may already know based on previous decisions or previous opinions that they've written how they lean on certain issues. Howard, let me ask you, the Democrats here on this, does the fact that he is potentially going to interview 2 women somehow change the Democratic strategy or those who oppose these nominees going forward, the fact that they're on the short list?
It depends who they are. The most important thing is competence and quality and be a serious judge. And there are several on the court who have turned out not to be very serious, even though they're very smart and so forth. But they're ideologues. That's not what you're supposed to appoint. You're supposed to appoint somebody who actually follows the law, and there's at least 4 of them that haven't on issues like Bush versus Gore and Citizens United. So this has been a bit of a charade, these Republican judges, over the last 20 years, where they pick people who will suit their ideological litmus test. All have been vetted by the Federalist Society, which is this right-wing society that chooses judges to get to a particular result. And the court's in trouble because 79% of Americans believe the court's a political body. That's not a good thing for the country.
So, Liz, and to that point, and we know the Democrats are gearing up for a fight. There's potentially 3 Democrats who voted for Neil Gorsuch when he was nominated and confirmed in the Senate. Those 3 senators are still facing the same political challenges. They all are running in states that were heavily won or strongly won by President Trump, and they're going to have to explain their decision to their voters and their constituents. How is this likely to play out for those 3 senators come the midterms and this vote?
Well, despite all of the political, conversation and the discourse that we're having right now, abortion is actually quite popular. Abortion rights are quite popular in this country. 7 out of 10 Americans, according to Pew, want to preserve Roe v. Wade. Even when you look at people who identify as pro-life, 6 out of 10 of them want to preserve rights to abortion, at least in certain cases. And so it's really hard to see Republicans making a case that this is a popular measure. I mean, at this point, if 7 out of 10 Americans are, support Roe v. Wade, abortion rights are more popular than Donald Trump right now. So it would be, I think, foolish for even Republicans to think that this is an issue that loses them, that sort of is bad for them.
Paul, we know that the issue of the Supreme Court nominees was a mobilizing factor for Trump's base in the general election. He came out with his list of dozens of candidates that he said he would put forth if he had these openings. I'm curious to get your thoughts by the politics of this now. Has the issue of Roe v. Wade become a litmus test, not only for this president, but also for his base that they're going to use politically down the road?
I think absolutely. One way that they would frame it is states' rights. So if the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade, which is very likely based on almost any of these 25 people on Trump's list, abortion wouldn't be illegal necessarily. Each state would have the right to decide. And so that's probably the political message that Trump would offer. So even if a lot of people support abortion, Trump would say, well, you could still have it in your state. You just have to lobby your state legislatures.
Obviously, given what's at stake with this nominee and the Supreme Court pick, you can obviously expect a lot of reaction from the Democrats. Let me play you this soundbite from the former Vice President Joe Biden today campaigning for Democrats in Ohio today. He also weighed in on Roe v. Wade. Take a listen.
What I'm worried about is basic settled law being completely dismissed. I believe that the president's made it clear he'd like to undo Roe v. Wade. All he needs is one more vote.
So a similar question to you that I just asked, Paul. Is Roe v. Wade going to be the defining issue of this confirmation? And is there really a way for any of the Democrats who are going to seriously consider this nominee, not just because it's from President Trump, but anyone who's going to seriously look at this candidate and say there's a way to find out what this person's views are on this issue?
Well, they'll hem and haw. I mean, the other, Joe Biden just said, it's the person that's going to be appointed by Trump is going to get rid of it. That actually isn't. Even Roberts claimed that it was settled law. Now, if you take him at his word, which I don't, he'll have to vote to sustain the precedent. I don't think that's going to happen. So, this is a delicate dance where many people say things that aren't true, and they know aren't true when they say them. And then we have to see what they do on the bench.
What do you make, Liz, of the announcement that it's on July 9th? Not so much the date, but the fact that he seems to be rushing this decision. Do you think that they're obviously weighing that it's going to be something to mobilize the base in the midterm if the Democrats try to stall this nomination process in whatever ways that they can?
Absolutely. I mean, women and men across this country are fired up. They did not think, a lot of, especially young voters.
On both sides of the aisle, or you think?
On the Democratic side, by the idea that Roe v. Wade could be put into question. I mean, most of us young voters, well, I can't vote in this country because I'm Canadian, but most people who do vote and who are young people, didn't grow up in a pre-Roe era. They've only known a world where abortion is legal. And I just want to say also, it's not just because abortion is legal that it's accessible in this country. There are, even if we don't overturn Roe v. Wade, there are many laws that are in place right now. Iowa just yesterday passed a 6-week ban on abortion. I mean, basically, you can't get an abortion after 6 weeks, which is, for many women, you don't even know that you're pregnant yet. And so, and abortion deserts in many cities across this country. So even if this even if Roe v. Wade is not overturned, we still have a lot of work to do in terms of guaranteeing women reproductive rights.
This is going to be a central issue in the campaign, no matter what happens, because young people are driving our party. And they drove us in Virginia and knocked off 15 incumbents, and they're going to drive us through the general election. And there are a lot of sympathy for people, even in conservative states, when they're younger, to keep the status quo.
I want to read you guys a little bit of this New York Times, because they were reporting that Trump's campaign to convince Justice Kennedy to retire, saying that the White House waged a quiet campaign to ensure that Mr. Trump had a second opportunity to change the complexion and the direction of the Supreme Court. How much of this is driven by President Trump's desire to leave a lasting legacy? I mean, if he picks somebody 40s, 50s, even as late as the 30s, it is going to be a generational shift for the Supreme Court.
Well, I mean, it's pretty unseemly, really. It turns out that Justice Kennedy is apparently the one that was Trump's financial lifeline when he was working at Deutsche Bank, and no other bank would lend him money because he wouldn't pay his creditors. I mean, that's pretty unseemly. I've never heard of that at the Supreme Court before. There have been some pretty awful decisions, but I've never heard of a justice's son being so tight with the president that they could cook something like this up. There'll be a lot of questions about that if it turns out to be true. That's going to tar Justice Kennedy's legacy, and I think Trump's is permanently tarred anyway, so you can't make it much worse.
Yeah, I agree with Howard that it's unseemly, but it's also extremely strategic on the part of the Republicans. They've always understood the power of the appointment process for the federal bench in a way that sometimes the Democrats haven't gotten, because it's not just abortion that's on the line, even though that's extremely important. It's also voting rights, the power of corporations, school desegregation, affirmative action.
Yep.
Everything's not just up for grabs, but over and done if Trump gets to make this appointment.
So, Paul, do you think that Trump here has been somewhat underestimated for how strategic he has been in this?
Absolutely. So he nominated Gorsuch 11 days after his inauguration. That's super quick. He's going to do the same thing with regard to his next appointment to try to get this man or woman in and doing their conservative work before the midterm elections.
Liz, this promises to be the most expensive fight over Supreme Court pick probably that this country has ever seen. You talked a minute ago about how this is going to mobilize, young Democrats and others who are in favor of abortion or the women's right to have an abortion. Let me ask you, though, the flip side. If, in fact, we go into the midterms without a Supreme Court pick confirmed, and the future of this pick depends on who wins, isn't that going to mobilize the president's base? Because we know it was a central issue. Again, for them, it was one of the most important issues in the general election.
Absolutely. Look,
who wins that fight?
Right. I mean, we already knew that the midterm was going to be have a higher voter turnout than the previous one, which was abysmally low, especially with young voters. And I think what we're going to see, I mean, this is arguably the most important election in our lifetime, especially, again, speaking for young voters who are being riled up. And we're seeing, people who had never voted before in the New York election that just happened this week. Demographics, and again, young people who don't show up at midterms usually will be showing up, and it will be making a difference.
I mean,
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.